Next up, we have Mikel, Maron, and Kate Chapman giving us an incomplete history of Hot Part 2.
Hello. Hey, Kate, you there too?
Yeah, hi all.
I'm gonna load up our slides. Can I get an okay that when we see everything?
Slides are up.
Awesome. So, start with an intro. I'm Mikel. Been around Hot since Hot didn't exist. And during the period we're talking about, 2010 to 2015, did a bit of everything, but my main role was I'm president of the Hot Board of Directors.
Hi all. I'm Kate. I was involved in Hot before it was like an organization, but not back when it was just an idea. A few years before that, I was Hot's first executive director, and also the person that did some things like opened our first bank account and like did the incorporation paperwork. And yeah, so excited to come tell some of our perspective together with Mikel today.
Yeah, that reminds me of sometimes us running around DC when we switched our bank accounts and being the only person who was left in DC who was actually a signatory to Hot. Okay, so first up, just want to warn that this is even more incomplete than part one of this series of talks. I gave a talk on part one at the first Hot Summit 5 years ago. There's a link. We'll send that around if you're curious. And overall, I think we see that, looking back, a lot of the decisions we made, they were the right decisions at the time, but we couldn't fully see the repercussions and the impacts of what we were doing. It was ad hoc. We were learning as we were going along. Amazingly, some of them are still right, and some of the things that we had to abandon, I think, are still right. And so it's a very interesting time to surface and to take this look back. So appreciate it. We've kind of broken this down into a few different sections, and I'll start by speaking to activations. This is a chart on the OpenStreetMap wiki of all the activations between 2009 to 2015. I'm just blown away at the number of disasters that Hot responded to really incredibly with a lot of passion. When we started doing this, there was no organization to this at all. It was basically, there was tweets, there was mailing list posts, there were wikis. And Haiti was basically a lot of mostly experienced OpenStreetMap mappers. As far as we know, none from Haiti, and none in Haiti, certainly. About 600 people mapped over the course of several weeks, and used mailing lists, used the wiki, and managed to coordinate with each other, even though it was a huge number of people editing one place at one time. Over the 5 years, very impressive to see the work of people really deeply involved with activation, formalize and digest and really get to the essence of what activation is. The activation protocol I think is still an amazing document. Folks like Russ and others were deeply involved in figuring out a system for what we do in the midst of disaster. And it culminates in 2015 with the Nepal earthquake. And this was a really different activation in that I think it really was the ideal of what we want to see. Well, of course, we don't want to see major earthquake, but this was an activation that was led by folks in Nepal. This is the outdoor situation room of Kathmandu Living Labs. And thousands of people were coordinated by a team on the ground. I think that's really the direction we'd love to see more of, rather than folks from abroad or from other places. Did I miss anything, Kate?
I don't think so. I think so. I'm going to talk about something that I don't think is nearly as much in use today, but was really core to what we were doing back, especially in 2010, 2011, was the Hot Kit. Next slide, Mikel. And so we had this thing, so we called Hot Kits. It was everything you needed to map in a box. And I found this on the OpenStreetMap blog. It was just an email I had sent that we were going to Haiti and we were trying to figure out how to get more computers, GPS units, and printers to help people continue mapping, and did a fundraiser for it. One of the funny things about this fundraiser was over the years, support comes from all corners. And so someone at Google, for example, was like, well, we'd love to help buy this, but we need a way we can just use our corporate credit card to donate to this. And how exactly we manage that now has been lost to time because we weren't even an organization then. But it was just one of the ways individuals figured out different ways to support us when we weren't even really we were just a group of people trying to do good. Next slide. And here's a picture of one of I think this is the very original kit. So we would take these large oversized Pelican cases with hardware in them and then leave them behind places so people had everything they need to map. The reason I think this is very different today is just access to GPS units isn't such a big deal. We were using Garmin hiking GPSs. Many people can just use their phones. Most people can use relatively inexpensive phones today. Access to computers isn't quite the deal it is as well either. So this is something that we spent a lot of time on and spent a lot of time packaging, which was perfect at the time, but not necessarily quite as relevant today.
I was so excited to see the stencil of OSM on these boxes. I remember seeing the pictures the first time. It was just amazing. So software was another big focus area over the 5 years. And the main piece of software, of course, which is still with us today, is a tasking manager. As it so happens, luckily, when we were preparing these slides late last night, there's a great wiki page which has some of the key moments in the development of the tasking manager, because it had an idea that went back to Haiti, even though we didn't use any tools like this. This is a screenshot or a kind of a composite of what a tool called OSM Matrix, which itself is lost to time, kind of looked like as a way of applying a grid and making a way for folks to select a square. Because even during the Haiti activation, we certainly were tripping over each other, and there was mapping in the same area, a lot of edit conflicts, and so the need was established. And this is what this interested. This is a screenshot of some notes from a WearCamp evening conversation about like what should we do with after Haiti with HOP. The OSM grid square checkout service was one of the ideas, and I think what we found at this and at other events, I think there was a random hacks of kindness that Kate and others were at. We tried to just build this. Just let's get some people together and spend some time, and we'll build this thing. It turned out it was pretty hard to build this thing and build it well, and probably need to hire someone to do so. And to hire someone, of course, you need an organization. There were a number of tools which are within the OSM ecosystem that were using this grid-like idea. OSM QA, quality assurance, was an idea of like gridding up and checking how complete an area was, or how the quality of mapping in an area. And that was one of the developers of that was a guy named Pierre Girard, who worked for a company called Camp to Camp. And here's Pierre presenting at the first Hot Summit in DC. And again, pretty ad hoc. Kate apparently emailed subject line, OSM tasking tool. Are you interested in developing this tool for mappers and surveyors in Indonesia? The reason why we could do this at this point in support development was because of the project work, which was happening in Indonesia, had support for funding for tools like this. And then I was personally involved in the round 2 V2, which is still my favorite tasking manager of the 4. But we basically kind of passed the hat to a few of the organizations around in DC and gathered requirements, and then Pierre built that. So this is the way that we built software back in 2013, 2014. Over to you for governance, Kate.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about governance, and there were a lot of decisions that we really just wanted a bank account. That was our actual goal. Next slide. And this isn't the original screenshot of the our bylaws, but it's close to it. It's like the second version that a lawyer tried to fix, because for those who don't know me well, I am not a lawyer, but I have not been afraid to do some armchair lawyering. So I helped write our bylaws and articles of incorporation and physically took them down to the Washington, D.C. business office. There was something wrong with them. I was very lucky that I got a nice person who worked there who fixed them and reprinted them in the office. So we were able to do this. So we incorporated as Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Team, United States Incorporated, which is a very long name, and I don't think a lot of people know the history. So incorporated, that's just, you have to have something like that in a title. But I also added United States because we actually had always intended to incorporate in multiple countries. We just never really, honestly, it was a lot more work than we needed to do, and we didn't get around to it, at least during those first 5 years. And so that was where we started, in August. We had a real organization, had a bank account, all that good stuff. And then next slide, then we had our first official, I'll say this, like our first official board meeting. Meaning we had met before, but the Wilson Center had given us an in-kind donation to have a group facilitate a board meeting where we started to figure out governance. And this is the board that attended at the time. And this is also the meeting where we decided I would become our executive director. I don't remember what title I was using at the time before that. I was actually on the board. This was also the point where we began to realize, staff and the board should be separate. They shouldn't, you shouldn't have this loop of people's bosses reporting to other people. So like, for example, myself as executive director, I would report to the board, but then you wouldn't want people reporting to me. So we began to try to figure those things out, because prior to that, we were really just trying to do things that hadn't given a lot of thought. And so some good work came from that, but it was in some ways more formal than the less traditional organization we had been. So then later, next slide, we brought in Alan Gunn and Aspiration Tech to help us work through things further and really try to figure out what type of organization we wanted to be. These strategic meetings was where we started to talk about things like the voting members. There's way more voting members than we really ever intended. We hadn't really thought about it. The original voting members were just the board and those folks who had gone to Haiti, and then we started nominating other people, but we hadn't really thought about what it meant, and we clearly had different visions at the time. And next up, Mikel's going to talk about imagery.
And I just want to say there's quite a lot of post-its there, notes behind Gunnar. If you've never been in a meeting with Gunnar and seen his magic with post-it notes, even virtual ones, it's something to behold. He's a master. Imagery. So much of this period was about trying to get imagery, and it's just crazy to reflect on it, because nowadays, we heard from. Of course, we heard from Laura talking about MapGive, which was amazing, and I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. Maxar's open data program, and plus just the base maps, global base maps that we have of pre-existing imagery. It's still an issue, but it doesn't feel like the scope of the problem that we had in this time period. It was so much of a problem. Here's from an event, someone was drawing while Kate was giving a talk about HOT, and the thing that stuck out the most that Kate gets caricatured for there is, can I use that image? Can we have the rights to use that satellite imagery for tracing in OpenStreetMap? We were asking for this over and over and over and over again, and going everywhere we possibly could. We started off with pretty amazing, but I think unusual situation after Haiti, where everything was suddenly available, and that's why we were able to do what we did. Is Google and Digital Globe and everyone else made that imagery available. People tiled it and set up tile servers that we could then bring into primarily JASM and edit. But that just wasn't the pattern. this is just an example of one tree we barked up a lot, but is not fruitful, which is the Disasters Charter. The Disaster Charter is an international agreement for sharing of imagery after disaster. Sounds great. Why can't we use it? We're hot. We're awesome. Haven't you heard of us? Well, no. Who are you guys? That sounds crazy. And plus, you're not a nation state or a UN agency. This is really an international treaty that has limited distribution of these images. We can't share this with you. So we had a lot of discussions about disaster chart, but it ultimately it went nowhere. MapGive and imagery of the crowd was pretty phenomenal. Josh Campbell and John Crawley and others at State at the time. I do not know how they threaded this legal needle. Still amazing that the U.S. government buys imagery and then can share it for humanitarian purposes and shares it with HOT. And of course now Maxar makes a lot of imagery available for humanitarian purpose. But imagery of the crowd really was like a big game changer for what we could do.
Yeah, so I'm just going to talk about a couple of our big projects during that time. There were lots of little ones as well, and I think it's important to note. And it wasn't just from 2010 to 2015, but we were entirely project funded. We would occasionally get little bits of donations, but not very much. Next slide. So one of our big projects was called Eurosha, and it brought youth Europeans to go work with local NGO partners in Africa. And it was a pilot and actually focusing on mapping. There's people from this project almost 10 years ago that are still heavily involved in HOT today, which I think is pretty amazing. Next slide. And then there was also our work in Indonesia. So this particular project was fundamentally life-changing for me personally. What happened after the earthquake in Haiti is the Australian government and the World Bank said, what if you map things ahead of time? And so Jeff Hack and I went to Indonesia just to kind of see. And this is the first mapping party we had at the University of Indonesia. If you look carefully, you'll see some HOT staff in the background here. So what's amazed me is just the longevity of people who have joined and then come. Next picture. So we did that mapping, but then it was like, what if you go work with small NGOs? What if you work with groups who are already doing poverty maps and we help them use OpenStreetMap? So then that data is available for a variety of uses, but especially disaster preparedness. The reason I share this picture is it went from I was occasionally going to Indonesia to 4 of us were flying all over Indonesia, just teaching people how to map and trying to figure things out. And from that, we developed a curriculum, which parts of which are still in use today. Next slide. And grew into even bigger team. This painting it's bittersweet for me because as I left HOT in 2015, this is a painting of our team in Indonesia, and showing we were given so much opportunity to work, teach mapping, but also just the amazingness of flying around a country to teach OpenStreetMap. And we would take up 2 rows on a plane sometimes when we were giving workshops when it was all of us. And just having that sense of community and be able to really spread free map data was a great opportunity. And it allowed us also to experiment so that we could get working on things that actually help move the organization forward as well. But you needed those experiments, like the tasking manager, for example, came out of that project. Next slide. And I think I'd be remiss not to mention the HOT Summit. I have no idea why I deleted the tweet before Dale's response to this, but Joseph Reeves said, we should have a summit, we should come together. And it just started as a small idea, and then that grew, and now it's continued to grow, which has been, this is actually only the second HOT Summit I've attended. I've attended the first and today, but just that those little things turned into big things, and we didn't really have big aspirations for them. It was just more, oh, hey, we should get together. And next,
Warning.
and missing maps as well. This is a sketch note I made from a presentation about it in the early days. Just the level of partnership. It's something I am proud of and point to when I'm talking about partnerships amongst other organizations today. And then I just wanted to share a little bit of hot lore as well, just because there's little things that have happened. So this is a map cake the World Bank had made for the first mapping party ever done there. Next. This is our first discussion of piling in together in a house at State of the Map. The idea of the hot house, where we would just fit as many people as possible into accommodations. Next. On the right, you have one of those hot houses, and on the left, during the State of the Map that was in Birmingham, we rented a bunkhouse in Sherwood Forest and planned to just hack, but no one took into account that there really wouldn't be a good Wi-Fi. Here is us. So that stick is us attempting to get my phone out the window to get a little bit better mobile signal, to have a better better internet. So it was just kind of funny to not sort of the silly things we did, but then the impactful work we've been able to do. And we were going to talk a little bit about some reflections. Mikel?
Yeah, I'll just conclude by saying, we started off with HOT really trying to do something different, a different kind of organization that was modeled on open collaboration. That's not the traditional model. But we hit the reality of resources, of dealing with money, and I think it challenged our innocence of what was workable. You need to have accountability. You need to have some structure, and the struggle to grow through that was hard, honestly. And there were times when I think it was through blood, sweat, and tears that HOT stayed together. And I'm really proud that HOT is still here, is stronger than ever. I don't know, I can't think of another org that kind of was founded during the heat of Haiti that's still existing and still going strong. But that reaction that we had to take, I think, set HOT on a trajectory towards a more traditional NGO structure. But I'm really pleased to see what the Audacious project is enabling, and it was great to hear Tyler's thoughts earlier today on kind of a vision of how things are going to go forward. And I think there's a lot from our formative days to draw upon.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, everyone did the best they could at the time. I think about myself in 2010 versus 2020, and like a whole decade. I'm also surprised by the things that stuck. For example, the tagline a lot of people put in their signature was just something I made up because I needed to make the business cards look a little fancy. And it's been cool to see it expand from there. But I really appreciate what it's grown into, and I'm amazed by what's happened in the past 5 years, because when I resigned as executive director in 2015, I haven't been super involved since, very occasionally making connections. I do hang out on the membership list, but that's about it. So, I'm just amazed at the work everyone's done, and I'm really proud of you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate. Thank you, Mikel. That has been an amazing series of talks, and we are now moving on to our keynote and closing remarks.